A lot of attention gets paid to the light duty electric vehicle market, but in my opinion, the real action is going to take place on the heavy duty EV market, commercial trucks that are going to be electrified, like the Tesla electric semi. And Environmental Defense Fund in the US has paid for a study about the charging infrastructure that's required for those trucks. And I'm going to talk to Tim O'Connor from the EDF. So welcome to the interview, Tim.
Great, thank you for having me.
Now look, why don't we start with an overview of the study, please?
Great. So we looked at the available literature for unpacking, what goes into charging and the costs and the capabilities for, supporting large deployments of large trucks for the heavy duty ones. And what we found was that there really wasn't much real world information out there where fleets and policymakers could understand, what are the true costs that fleets face and how can those be reduced and managed. And so by working with a nationally reputable consulting firm, Gladstein Anderson Associates, and partnering with two major fleets that are leading in this effort on electrification, we studied a year's worth of trip data for two different fleets that were looking to go electric. And so by looking at their routes, where they drove, how long they remained at each place, what the miles were, we could quantify what it would take to electrify two large fleets. And by looking at all that data, we identified how much it would cost, what kind of battery capabilities they would need, what kind of charging systems they would entail, and ran through numerous scenarios to identify what would be the best way to manage all that load for the purpose of supporting both their goals and the goals of the electric grid.
Okay, I understand that the charging infrastructure is going to be expensive to begin with. When you start with new technologies, it always is. But is there a business case for electric commercial trucking?
So when you look at the use of these trucks, they can be very expensive to replace an old diesel truck with a brand new electric truck. Thankfully, there are a lot of government programs and other incentive matrices, as well as new business models that are popping up to reduce that upfront purchase price. And so then when you compare fuel use of old diesel trucks with new electric trucks, you see that for large fleets, there is a dramatic savings that you can gain on a year-over-year basis, millions of dollars, in fuel savings. Second, when you look at deploying these trucks with things such as on-site solar and energy storage, you can reduce the cost of that charging. You can optimize when that charging happens. You can avoid the peak use so that you actually have a positive net present value, which means that the savings you're going to get over the life of that truck and that charging station is better than the alternative. And so there is a business case. And as batteries continue to decline in cost and improve in capabilities, you get even farther and farther towards the positive end of that business spectrum.
Now, my understanding from talking to other EV analysts is that there's actually electric trucks work really well for most deliveries because those deliveries, it's how many kilometers or miles that truck's going to travel. It goes on the same route every day, and it's going to come home back to the base at the same day, and it'll be charging overnight, and so it's predictable. Is that a major factor in terms of adopting electric trucks and building infrastructure?
Well, what we looked at was, for these trips that these two fleets were going to take, and knowing their distance, knowing how long they were going to be on the road for, how long they would needed to dwell at their individual drop-off points, we evaluated, could electric trucks that are on the market today or that are planned for near-term release actually meet the requirements of these fleets? And we found that for these two fleets, nearly 90% of the trips that they were taking could be completed, with trucks that are either on the market or near-term deployments today. So whether the trucks can accomplish the duty cycle is not a question. They absolutely can. Yes, if you're looking at going from New York to California, or going from Victoria, BC down to Fort Lauderdale, there's going to need to be charging along the way, but not a lot of trucks are doing that. For urban deliveries, for urban freight, things that are going from ports to warehouses and back to ports and delivering to like local businesses, there's not a question that these trucks can meet those needs. And what we found is that with a short or with a small investment in regional charging, you don't need these trucks to fill up from 0 back to 100 while they're out there on their routes. You may need for them just to top up from a 40% charge to a 55% charge to make it back to their base. You can vastly increase also the amount of truck trips that you can make to get at those last 10% to eliminate pretty much all range anxiety in these urban delivery environments.
Now, did you talk to utilities and about the what their role in building out this charging infrastructure, whether, say, their infrastructure within a particular neighborhood or community would have to be upgraded and how much that would cost? Did that factor into your study?
Yeah, we talk to utilities all the time. We're participating in utility commission dockets, whether it be in California, in New Jersey, New York, Texas, broadly across the US, and in, national sort of discussions around with utility regulators. Utilities, they obviously, are invested in this because, it's happening to them, in terms of extra demand and things as these vehicles get deployed, and it can happen to the benefit of them. And so they can sell more electricity. They can use these vehicles to help smooth the grid, as well as to engage in the idea that as vehicles plug in, they don't necessarily need to increase the peak. There can be certain strategies to manage charging and to avoid issues associated with peak, coincident demand and from trucks as well as the general society. So our study looked at actually how much you could reduce that peak, through these large deployments, how much you could shift that. And what we found is that managed charging plus the use of distributed energy resources is core to both controlling costs and smoothing out overall energy demand. And when we spoke with utilities, they see these findings as something they've been thinking about for a while, but also as a calling card for ensuring that the utility regulators that are giving them the green light to spend money, those that are leading this space, this is a validation of a lot of the planning they've been involved in for years.
Now, one of the key findings of your study was that programs, at least in the short term, probably to the medium term, maybe, programs are going to be needed to accelerate the adoption of this infrastructure and electric trucks. Could you describe what's needed, please?
So we know that in places like California, Oregon, Washington, Canada, where people are looking at carbon pricing and looking at alternative fuel programs, that within there is money that's been created to invest in low carbon solutions. In California, the low carbon fuel standard, for example, I know it's something that Canada's thought about. Or in our cap and trade program, the use of money to go after investments that can lock in reduction in pollution. So what we see in this industry and this build out of infrastructure, for these big deployments of trucks, you could have upwards of $10 to $20 million for a specific facility that might need to be invested in all of the make ready work, the trenching, the electrical conduit, plus the chargers, plus the other, the solar panels and things. So it could be a very expensive proposition. And this isn't then something that everybody can just absorb. And so these other programs that feed in, to these carbon reduction infrastructure investments, these are some things that are going to be needed in the near term, to help overcome, these challenges. Now, because when you look at sort of, long-term value of these things, of these truck deployments, you could see long-term cost savings, but there is an upfront hurdle that not all companies are able to face. Now, if these policies also reward high use of that infrastructure. So it's not, you don't just want to build a charging station that's never used, because you're not going to be able to amortize that over the long term. And so the value of programs that both give, money to bring down those purchase prices, while also incenting use, especially as the battery prices for trucks continue to decline, and as you have more industry-wide acceptance of these charging stations, so that we have some time to build out new financing models so that the private capital markets can help to invest as well. That is going to be core. And that was one of the main findings of the report.
Tim, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.